Hi, I'm Ian Rees, and you're listening to Scottish Shindig with Andy Phillip on Radio GH.
The Scottish Shindig, the best in Scottish dance music and song.
Well, hello and a very warm welcome. It's Andy standing in for you, and welcome to the Scottish Shindig for the 732nd Shindig since it started 14 years ago. So sit back, relax, get ready for some dancing and some singing, and enjoy the next hour of great music and song. And to get us off to a great start, we'll start slightly differently with a wee song with the theme of the programme from the Alexander Brothers, Let's Have a Ceilidh.
Oh, let's have a ceilidh, come with me, dance to the music, merry, merry music, come let us make the rafters ring. Let's have a real old Highland fling, swing your partner paddy-ba, have a drappy slange afar. You will agree it's just the thing, join in the fun and whoop and sing. Moracle dance with Will McCrae, dance they will till break of day. Kirsty and Duncan, John and Jean, the grandest crowd you've ever seen. Let's have a ceilidh, come with me, dance to the music, merry, merry music, come let us make the rafters ring. Let's have a real old Highland fling. The bandy will play and it's some real, laddies will shout and lassies squeal. Some folk will get a wee bit woo, still they will dance the whole night through. Soon you will find you're all aglow, heel for heel and toe for toe, drinking quickly from your glass, afore you chase and never last. Let's have a ceilidh, come with me, dance to the music, merry, merry music, come let us make the rafters ring. Let's have a real old Highland fling. And it's some real, laddies will shout and lasses squeal. Some folk will get a wee bit woo, still they will dance the whole night through. Soon you will find you're all aglow, heel for heel and toe for toe, drinking quickly from your glass, afore you chase and never last. Let's have a ceilidh, come with me, dance to the music, merry, merry music, come let us make the rafters ring. Let's have a real old Highland fling. Let's have a ceilidh, come with me, dance to the music, merry, merry music, come let us make the rafters ring. Let's have a real old Highland fling.
Well, a great start to the programme from the Alexander Brothers with Let's Have a Ceilidh, and indeed, as Ewan mentioned last week, the Shindig, the Scottish Shindig, has been on the air for the last 14 years. And that's an incredible 1,308 hours, would you believe? I've got tons of exciting statistics like that for you, but what we'll do is we'll start off with ceilidh with the way an easy dance for everyone, a great one to start a ceilidh off with. It's a Circassian Circle, and no less, it's Graham Mitchell and his Scottish Dance Band from the album Full Swing, and it was actually the first track that Ewan played on the very first Shindig. Well, a great track from Graham Mitchell and the Scottish Dance Band for a Circassian Circle, and that was from his album In Full Swing, and we'll keep it going from Alex MacArthur and his Scottish Dance Band. Great to see you all tuned in, by the way, from Shetland to Southampton and all the way across to Missouri, New Zealand, Australia, Rhode Island. Great to see you all. I hope you're having a great evening and a good weekend. Here we go with Alex MacArthur and the Scottish Dance Band from an album Old Masters Volume 1 with a Gay Gordon, so take your partners. Well, lovely track from Alex MacArthur and his Scottish Dance Band from an album Old Masters Volume 1, and that was of course for the Gay Gordons. Well, how about we hear from the man himself? Here's a track from Ewan Galloway and the band from the album Live and Approved. This is a track called Edinburgh Mix, and a great selection it is too. track from Ewan Galloway himself from an album called Live and Approved. That was the Edinburgh Mix, and a great track it is too. Well, another presenter on Radio GH, Gordon Young, features in this next track from Ian McPhail, a friend of the Shindig also. And Ian and George both visited Shindig in its early days back at TD1. And here's Ian and the guys in the band, including Gordon Young, who has his Gordon's Ceilidh on Saturday evening, 6 o'clock. Here they are for a waltz country dance, and I'll play this for Gordon and Diane. Well, a lovely track from Ian McPhail and his Scottish dance band from an album Celebrates in South America. That was a waltz country dance with some very well kent tunes there. And on drums was Gordon Young, presenter of Gordon's Ceilidh on a Saturday evening at 6 o'clock. Well, we're talking about the history of the Shindig, and we should always remember, of course, Derek Hamilton. And Derek, I'm going to play a track of Derek's here from his album Irish, Scottish Country and Me. And here he is with a set for Hooper's Jig. Lovely track from Derek Hamilton and a set for Hooper's Jig from his album Irish, Scottish, Country and Me. And you'll hear more from Ewan and Derek later in the programme. I've included 2 tracks from each of them in the programme. Well, the next dance comes from Ian Hudson and his Scottish Dance Band from an album called Dashing White Sergeant, but it's not the Dashing White Sergeant, it's a military 2-step. Take your partners, here's Ian Hudson and his Scottish Dance Band. Great track from Ian Hudson and his Scottish Dance Band for a military 2-step, and that was from his album Dashing White Sergeant. And a hello to, so there was a couple of names there that I hadn't seen before. Give me 1 second. Craig and Graham, they're listening probably on the beach in Maspalomas in Gran Canaria. If you are, please turn the speaker up. I would love to see a picture of the faces of those round about listening to Scottish music on a sandy beach in Maspalomas. That would be worth it. Well, mentioned earlier on, it's 14 years of the Shindig. That makes it the 732nd show this evening, which works out at 1,382 hours, or 82,920 minutes. And if you work out that a track is roughly 3 minutes, that's a minimum of 27,640 tracks that's been played on the Scottish Shindig. When you break it down like that, it's quite incredible. Anyway, time for the next track before you fall asleep with statistics. And it comes from the Haimfarers. This is a request from Marjorie. Marge over in Missouri for Peter Wood. Peter's been a bit under the weather of late, and she asked for a track with a Shetland theme for Peter Wood, and wishing him all the best and hope he's feeling a bit better. Here's a track from the Haimfarers with some great jigs, all written by Ronnie Cooper. Lovely track of Jigs from the Hamefaders with a selection of Ronnie Cooper tunes from an album called Tribute to Ronnie Cooper, 1934 to 1982. And that was requested by Marge, especially for Peter Wood, and sending best wishes to Peter from everybody here at Radio GH. Amanda, yes, I did work out that some of the shows were 2 hours, and Chat GPT was very happy with me for remembering that too. Back to the man himself. Here is Ewan Galloway with a track from his Easy Listening Lockdown album, and it's a bonny North American tune, A Shocking Farewell. Well, bonny arrangement of A Shocking Farewell by Ewan Galloway from his album An Easy Listening Lockdown. And as I promised you earlier, not only 2 tracks from Ewan but also from Derek, and time for a wee song. And guess who's going to sing it? It's Derek Hamilton from his album Welcome to My World. And the weather's going to get better, so it'll be time to put the blanket on the ground.
Come and look out through the window. That big old moon is shining down. Tell me now, don't it remind you of a blanket on the ground? Remember back when love first found us, we'd go slipping out of town, and we love beneath the moonlight, on a blanket on the ground. I'll get the blanket from the bedroom. We'll go walking once again to that spot down by the river where our sweet love first began. Just because we are married, I don't mean we can't slip around. So let's walk out to the moonlight and lay the blanket on the ground. Oh, remember how excited we used to get when love was young. For that old moon was our best buddy. We couldn't wait for night to come. Now you know you still excite me. I guess you love me like I am. Just once more I wish you'd love me, on a blanket on the ground. I'll get the blanket from the bedroom. We'll go walking once again to that spot down by the river where our sweet love first began. Just because we are married, it don't mean we can't slip around. So let's walk out to the moonlight and lay the blanket on the ground. And lay the blanket on the ground.
Well, a wee shift from the Scottish to the country with Blanket on the Ground from Derek Hamilton from his album Welcome to My World. Well, time to hear from another Radio GH presenter. It's Seamus O'Sullivan, and this is from a track from Stanley Cayley with a great set of, starting with a great set of jigs. great set of Irish jigs and reels from Seamus O'Sullivan, and you can hear Seamus with his touch of Irish on a Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock. And to a Thursday evening at 6 o'clock, you can tune into Vinyl Vault, brought to you by Scott Band. And here's Scott and his band from his album Bonnie Strathmore with a set for Postie's Jig. Great selection for Postie's Jig. That was from Scott Band and his band from the album Bonnie Strathmore. Well, back in time this time, and I'll play this one for Marge over in Missouri. This comes from Andrew Rankin and his band from the album Take to the Dance Floor, Take to the Dance Floor, beg your pardon. Take to the Dance Floor, and it's for a Dashing White Sergeant. So for Marge and for John White, a big fan of Andrew's music as we all are, here is a Dashing White Sergeant. Well, the great sound of Andrew Rankin and the band from an album Take to the Dance Floor. That was, of course, A Dashing White Sergeant. Great sound too. Well, we're going to slow the pace down a little bit and we're going to hear from Alan Crookston and the Cayley Band from the album Note Again. Take your partners this time for a St Bernard's Waltz. Well, some bonny arrangements and beautiful track from Alan Crookston Cayley Band from the album Note Again. That was, of course, a medley for the St Bernard's Waltz. Well, time for a Boston two-step. This time it comes from Lindsay Weir and a Scottish dance band from an album called Celtic Steps. Here we go, Boston two-step. A great tune, brilliantly played there by Lindsay Weir and a Scottish dance band from the album Celtic Steps. That was, of course, a Boston two-step. Well, step back in time a wee bit to Bill Black and his Scottish dance band from an album called The Dawning. Here we are, take your sets for a Virginia Reel. Well, lovely track from Bill Blackney's Scottish Dance Band from an album called The Dawning. That was, of course, a set for a Virginia reel. Well, time has caught up with us, unfortunately. Time passes so quickly. I hope you've enjoyed this sort of anniversary wee Cayley show, and we'll finish it off in grand style with an Arcadian Strip the Billow. So thanks very much for your company for the last hour, and I hope you have a great week. So take care of yourselves, and until the next time, it's cheerio from me, but I'll leave you in the very capable hands of Andy Kane and his band from an album Twist and Tradition. Let's see you all on the floor for an Arcadian Strip the Willow. Thanks very much for your kind words, folks. Take care and all the best till next time. Cheerio.
Bye.